Welcome back to another edition of Rich Rising Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Hummel, and I'm here with another special guest, Gia Lacqua. As a reminder, this platform has been created for women to come to have conversations, learn from the stories, experiences, and gain knowledge to find their true happiness and purpose. So Gia, thanks for coming on to Rich Rising.
Christine, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you and your audience today.
And Gia has been quite busy. She is a podcaster herself and an author of What the Shift. So, Gia, we're going to have you explain to the audience what you've been up to and somewhat about your personal and professional brand.
Sure. So, today I am a leadership strategist. I'm a trauma informed certified coach. I am, as you said, an author. I'm a speaker. I'm a podcast host. But most importantly, the most important title in my life, absolutely by far, is I am a proud girl mom. And that is, first and foremost in my heart and my mind. But yeah, before I started my coaching and consulting business, I was in the corporate world. I was a vice president of a Fortune 100 company. I built my career in the pharmaceutical industry, and I had built my career in ethics and compliance. And my job really was to identify the hidden risk inside of systems and processes within an organization that on the surface are working and usually working well. And what happened is one day I had, reached a bit of a bout of burnout. But one day I had turned that lens on my own life
Hmm.
and I started analyzing my own system. And I realized that on the outside, it was working, and on the inside, it really wasn't. And that was a powerful and pivotal shift for me in my story. And it really forced me to take a step back and reevaluate in my life what was working and what wasn't working. And what I realized that what I went through, certainly I was not alone. And I realized that most women aren't living their lives. They are executing a blueprint that someone else handed them and they put their name on it. And that's what led me to the work I do today.
Gosh, good for you. And I wish everyone could just hear that and take time and do that for yourselves. I mean, that's pretty progressive, and you have definitely got to a point where you've asked yourself those questions. Let's go back and have the listeners understand kind of where you came from in your journey. So maybe high school to college, what were your aspirations then, and what were you, looking to do, or what were you also told to do at the time? Were those two different, or were the same?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I have to say, I wasn't prescribed a particular path, which I appreciate because I know a lot of women who were. There was no option, there was no choice. It was you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer. So I appreciate the fact that I wasn't given a scripted path for a career. I knew I wanted a career. I knew I wanted to help people, and so I sort of floundered, to be honest, because I wasn't sure where I fit. I wasn't sure where I wanted to be. I wasn't sure where I belonged. And so, I thought maybe teaching was the right path for me. Never in a million years did I see myself being a corporate executive. And so, I saw maybe I would be a social worker, maybe I would be doing, something in this in the psych, my background is in psychology and
Hmm.
sociology, so that's really where I saw myself. And then I sort of fell into the corporate world and really loved the healthcare space because I was helping people, and being really driven by a purpose and a mission, and it felt really good to me. And I just excelled. I excelled in my role and I excelled in what I was doing. And so I stuck with it. And it was incredibly satisfying and rewarding. But what I came to realize is the part that I loved the most was helping other people. And as I ascended in my career, it was less about the work I was doing day to day because I had a fully functioning team that could really function without me, which is the ultimate goal of any leader.
Hmm.
What I realized is I was spending most of my time just coaching people. And that's what people were coming to me for. And so not only were people seeking me out for it, but I found myself, lit up in what I was doing. And so I realized it really required me to take a step back and think about my career strategically. And I shifted. I got my coaching certification, then got my trauma informed certification and really went all in, but it certainly did not happen overnight.
So go back to when you were thinking about if it was high school or college. You mentioned you thought maybe you should be a teacher or something in sociology and psychology. Why did you think that? And then your second comment was, why not a corporate executive? Why did you
Mhm.
default to teaching in sociology and psychology at first?
Yeah, I think part of it was the cultural and societal conditioning around traditional roles for women. I did not see myself wearing a suit. I saw myself in a helping profession. And,
Mm,
I at the time, blood and vomit were not my thing. So it was not nursing or becoming a doctor. So it was really like, am I a teacher? What it
yep,
really was more the nurturing because I'm a nurturer at heart. So I thought about like
yep.
the traditionally female oriented career paths. I did not see myself as the corporate executive in a suit. I think it literally comes down to that. It's the visual of what I thought women were supposed to do.
Mm. So when you became that corporate executive, how did you overcome that? Like, how did you get to that point where you were doing that role? And obviously, you evolved over time to do something different, but how did you get there?
Was not easy. I would say, I think the biggest thing was I look back on it and I'm grateful for the experience. I'm grateful for the opportunity. But a lot of it was I was performing a role of who I thought I had to be. So when I did put on that suit, it was how did I adapt to the environment?
Mm,
And I think it still is, but at the time, very much male dominated. So I looked around me and I became the chameleon. I became who do I
mm,
need to be in order to be accepted, in order to be liked, in order to be successful here. And I was really good at it. I was really good at being the chameleon because I was really good at adapting. And I think adaptability is a
yep.
fantastic skill set to have. And I think a lot of us pride ourselves on being adaptable and flexible as we should. But as with any strength when it's overused becomes a weakness.
Mm,
And when we become too adaptable, we lose ourselves. I became disembodied. I lost my voice because I was performing a role.
yep.
And so, I think it's important to recognize that skill served me incredibly well until it didn't. and
So
so, yeah.
were you fulfilled being a corporate executive?
So I was. I mean, I have to say I was fulfilled in the sense that I was tied to the mission, I was tied to the purpose day to day. I enjoyed the work I was doing. And most importantly, as you know, Christine, it was who I was with, right? It's all about the
Yep.
people that you're with.
People.
Culture is super important. And I worked for an organization that I loved, realizing that now it was a bunch of high achievers, a bunch of type A personalities running around and getting everything done and, burning themselves out. But I did enjoy it. I think and I didn't leave because I couldn't handle it. I didn't leave because I wasn't fulfilled. I left because I realized that I was meant for more. I was meant for
Mm,
different. I realized that I had untapped potential and I had a skill set that I really needed to explore that was not happening in the environment I was in. And I'll tell you a quick story that I think is really funny to this day is there was a gentleman I worked with for 10 years. He was on my team. And when I left, the first thing I did was I wrote 3 children's books.
huh.
And one day I was talking to him about a year or 2 after I left, after I'd published the children's books, and he said to me, I never knew you wanted to write children's books," as if I had been hiding this, like, deep, dark secret from him. He felt like, "I knew you this whole time, and you never shared this with me." And I said to him, "You know what? Neither did I."
Yep.
Because it wasn't something that I had been hiding. It's not something I knew existed. It's not something that was I knew was inside of me because I had lived within the confines of the construct that I was in. And
Yep.
that's not good or bad. It just is. It is what it is. And so once I left the construct and I left those confines and I realized, wow, I have all these options
Yeah.
and then I was able to be creative and explore that creative side, and I didn't know what would come of it.
So how long did that evolution take? I mean, is that something that you felt along the way for many years, like something else was there? Were there questions you were asking yourself? And how did you take that risk to do something different, to take that leap?
Very scary and a long time. Yes. I'm not gonna sit here and sweeten it up and say that it was, happened overnight and then it was easy. It wasn't. It's a hard journey, but I think it is one of the most impactful experiences that anyone could go through, which is to really turn inwards. Whether you're 20 or 50, it's never too late to turn inwards and really look at who you are at your core. Because at the end of the day, identity, we like to think of identity as how other people see us, when in fact,
Yep.
it's how we see ourselves. And who we believe we are, it's who we believe, what we believe we're capable of, what we believe we're not capable of. And ultimately, that drives our actions, our behaviors, our decisions, and our outcomes. And so we have to be really clear on who we are and know ourselves and what we want. And the other thing is that's not static. It changes as
Yep.
we evolve. And so checking in with ourselves to say, okay, like what is working and what is not working? And, is this who I want to be? Or
Yep.
oh, do I have some work to do? And I always have work to do. It's a continuous process because we're always evolving into the person that we want to be, right? For me, it's less about the external validation and approval than it used to be, and it's more about how can I be
Yep.
better than the person I was yesterday.
Yeah, I love what you said. Your identity is only how you feel about yourself. It's not how others view you. That's very important for especially a younger generation of women to listen to because you're the one that's got to live your life, right? You're the one that's got to be happy with who you are. So that's why you need to make the decisions for yourself and really question yourself on what you want to do versus what you should be doing. So, what does that conversation look like if you're giving advice to someone today that maybe is in a corporate executive job and she's not she's feeling that there's something more, she's
Mm.
feeling that maybe she's evolved and she's turning into something else, like how do you know if that's just boredom in your job, if you're going to shift careers, like what are some of the questions either you asked yourself in that moment or your advice that you'd give for people, and this is probably more for experienced professionals because I do see a lot of women, and I've interviewed a few women like 40s to 50s where they're kind of at their next chapter, like their second half is what people are calling it, right? And they're like, okay, my kids are older. I've kind of conquered my current role, my current career. Crap, I still have like this bucket list I want to do.
Yeah.
And so I see a lot of women trying to figure out how to prepare for their second half. So what questions did you ask yourself? And then what advice would you give women at this point where they're trying to evaluate something different?
So such a great question, Christine. I think first and foremost, I would say the identity piece is really critical. It's figuring out who you are in this chapter and what are you holding on to that is no longer serving you. Because sometimes it's a role, sometimes it's a relationship, sometimes it's a habit or behavior. And so getting crystal clear on who am I in this chapter of my life and what do I want? And, I think you're right. A lot of women are waking up midlife. They're waking up to
Yep.
lives that no longer fit because they were
Yep.
handed a blueprint of success that they followed and now realize, like, this isn't actually what I want anymore. And that's okay. But I think we feel guilty and I
Yep.
think we feel like we should be grateful for what we have, and we should be, and we are grateful for what we have. But that doesn't preclude you from wanting more or different. And I think that's the critical piece is we have to give ourselves permission to want different, to want more. And so I would say, first getting clear on who you are and what you want. But the other piece is really tuning into your core values. It's what is important to you, again, in this chapter of your life,
Yep.
right? In my 20s, I valued having fun. And it's not that I don't value having fun in my 40s, but really, what are my top three priorities?
Yeah.
Right. And so, I think it's important to recognize like, what are my values and how am I honoring them and how am I dishonoring them? Right. And seeing like, how do they line up and how am I living these
Yep.
values is really important.
But even your definition of fun in your 20s, right? A
Right.
definition of fun in your 20s
Right.
to a definition of now in our 40s or 50s. Fun for me is doing these conversations. Like
Yes.
this is the highlight of my week, right? Where in my 20s it was going out all night and let's going to a concert, and so as our definitions of fun even evolve, the definitions of success are going to evolve, or what you want to do tomorrow is different from yesterday. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be the same path
Yeah.
for 50 years. And I think your career professional journey is a great example of that. So at the time you're now questioning what's next for you, you have different aspirations, to go into more leadership. And then you have this podcast and this book too, oh, by the way, that you're going to launch. So walk us through, some of how that happened. And then were you afraid of failing? Like, was that ever a question in your mind? Taking this huge leap, was failure ever on your mind?
Oh my god. My relationship with failure is complex and deep, Christine. So, yeah, I recently published a book called Power Shift: From Balancing It All to the Pursuit of What Matters Most. And the goal is really, as we talked about, as high achieving women, the do it all generation, we're holding so much. And at the same time, we're not living up to our potential because we're
Yep.
saturated. And so it's really about how do we shift out of the external and into the internal and reevaluate who we are and where we want to be, and really the strategy that we're running. And so that's what the book is about. And I was petrified to press print on this book because of, I mean, there was a lot of things. It's the vulnerability of putting myself out there because there's a lot of my personal stories. But of course, the fear of failure actually, I would say in my 20s and 30s, fueled me. It
Mm,
fueled me, and it made me into this archetype that I refer to as a prover. There's 5 archetypes I like to say that women run as their default strategy. One is the prover, one is the fixer, one is the peacekeeper, and one is the ghost, and one is the chameleon. And so, I definitely was the prover because if I failed, what would that mean to my identity? What would that mean to
mm,
who I was? What would that mean to my self worth? And so the fear of failure actually drove me because it's like,
mm.
wow, I can't fail. This is not even an option. And so I say it's a complex and deep relationship because I had to completely flip that upside down and realize that no, failure is how we grow. Failure is how we learn. Failure is also how you define it,
Yep.
right? Like, what does failure actually
Right.
even mean? And in
Right.
whose eyes,
Right.
right? You get to define failure. And so I think that's a really important point is like, who's defining failure for you? Because when I try something and it doesn't work, I don't even call it a failure. I call it an experiment, right? So some of
Yeah.
it is just
Exactly.
the way we think about things. But yeah, it was certainly not easy because we were taught to be perfectionists. We were taught to be people pleasers. We were taught to be overachievers. And when we're not doing that, we think we're failing. We think we're failing or letting somebody down. And so it's important to recognize that failure is really how you define it, just like success. And it's important to recognize that we have to decide what is success and what is failure.
No, that's great advice. And, even the younger generation now, like they are even fearful of picking the wrong major, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, so then you pick another one, right? Or it's not that I think everyone always has like the next in their mind, like their next goal. And if they don't achieve it, they feel like they're failing. I just interviewed the graduation from high school. They're going on to college last week, and they knew their majors, they knew their
Mm,
colleges. And I'm
right.
like, how did you all know these answers so quickly? Like, I'm still figuring it out, right? And they talked through it a little bit, and I wonder though if they just have more information and knowledge now to make better decisions. Like they were all very intelligent girls, and it's just interesting. They didn't have that same fear of failing. Like they knew their journey. And I just wonder, do you think that's different, the fear of failure for like our experienced professionals, you and I in our 40s and 50s? Do you think the fear of failure is different for us versus that younger generation of women that are, let's say college age
Um,
graduating?
Great question. I do. I do think it's different because over the past, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, I think we've embraced failure. I think there's been a cultural shift in leadership and in education to teach people that failure is an opportunity, to see failure as an experience, to be able to learn from failure. And if we don't fail, then we're not learning and we're not growing. That was not the mindset that we were raised with,
Yeah.
right? And so I do think that's a huge shift. And I think that helps equip people to not be so afraid of if I make the wrong, quote unquote, wrong decision or, the wrong choice in the moment, right? You're committed to what you're committed to and you have a good reason for it.
Yep.
And being okay with the fact that, like, if that doesn't work, having the confidence, the self confidence to say, I will pivot. I will shift. And that's the premise of my podcast. What the shift is really like for those pivot moments when you realize like something's not working and I need to make a change because it's hard and it's scary.
So, in your podcast, What's the Shift? What do you hear are some common themes that come out from people that you interview in relation either to failure or to confidence when they're telling their stories, or you ask them pretty direct questions? What are some common themes that you hear from women?
So many. So, I mean, the biggest thing is shift from the external validation
Mm.
to the inner knowing. It's women who have learned to turn down the volume on the external noise and turn up the volume on your inner knowing, your inner wisdom, and your inner voice. That seems to be the common thread of being able to trust yourself, being able to be true to who you are, as opposed to wearing these masks and these labels and really getting back in touch with who you are and what you want in life.
I love that. Do you think that women trust themselves more in the younger generation than maybe more of the experienced professional generation? Do you think there's more trust? And I don't want to necessarily link trust and confidence, but do you think there's more trust and confidence with the younger generation?
I hope so. I'd like to think I don't think we're fully where we need to be, but I think it's improved. I think
Yeah.
because we've made a conscious effort to teach girls more about self-esteem, about self-confidence, about things like body awareness,
Mm.
body positivity, just things that, again, that we didn't necessarily have growing up. And so the ability to explore different career paths. I mean, I just feel like there was maybe like one of four choices that we were given, and it's like you have to fit into one of these buckets versus now through, incredible experiences in school and outside of school, whether it's sports, extracurricular activities, things like Girl Scouts, where we get to explore leadership and entrepreneurship and STEM and robotics and, all these different things. I think it gives them a sense of confidence and self trust that is maybe different than the previous generation, I guess is the best way I can say it. They get to explore themselves and their interests and their likes a little bit more.
Now that's great advice. And if you can go back in time, if you could take what you know now, at the age and the experiences you had, and you could do something different throughout your career journey, your professional journey, even what you majored in college, would you go back in time and change anything? And if so, what would that be and what would you do?
Oh my gosh, this is such a hard question for me. So the perfectionist in me wants to say, yeah, I would do this differently and I would do that differently and I would have gotten a different degree and I would have gone for an advanced degree and but my heart says no. My heart
Mm.
says no. I am who I am because of the choices I made, the decisions I made, the experiences that I had and the journey that I've been through. And so I wouldn't trade that, for where I am, everything, my journey has brought me to this point. And so I can't say that I would have changed anything or done it differently.
Yeah, and most women that I ask that question to have a similar answer. They wouldn't change anything. There's one woman that sticks out in my head
Mhm.
every day. She was retired corporate healthcare, and I asked she wanted to be a physician in college. And at the time, she was by her counselor and a professor was told it wasn't good for a mom to be a doctor. There was no work-life balance. So she became a pharmacist. And so when I asked her that same question I just asked you, and I basically said, "Would you go back in time? Would you wanna be a doctor?" She goes, "I think every day," and
Mm,
broke my heart because that was her passion, that
sure.
was her life, what she wanted her life to be, and she still missed that, but 99% of the women answer it like you do, and they say, "No, I wouldn't change anything because I don't know like, how I would have gotten here. I don't know what would have been different," and they're very happy with where they are. But it's a great parallel, and you and I have touched on it several times. It's there is no start and finish line. And maybe speak to, how you educate and coach women. I really want the perception for younger generation not to think you have to go through this linear path and that the end there'll be like rainbows and unicorns, streamers and, trumpets. It doesn't work like that. There is no final destination where you're going to just explode in this happiness, right? So, can you walk through how you coach women and what advice you'd give to younger generation to not work towards that linear path and think of it more like a branch, right? And all these different paths that you can cross along the way.
It's a great point. I think, there's something that I talk about in the work that I do. It's called the arrival fallacy, which is exactly what you just described. It's the belief that once we hit the goal, once we reach the destination, we will be X. We will be happy. We will be fulfilled. Once I lose the weight, I will be happy with myself. I will be confident, right? Once I get the job, I will finally be satisfied in my career. And it's a false perception. And so it's called the arrival fallacy because we think once we get there, we will have all the things we're longing for. When in reality, we keep moving the bar. We arrive, and then what happens is we relish in it maybe for a second or two, and then we're on to the next thing. We raise the bar, we're on to the next goal, we're on to the next achievement, the next gold star, because what we're seeking is that external validation. And so until you shift into, that internal sense of fulfillment and success and accomplishment, you will continue to do that. And so I think it's a really important point to realize that, we have to focus on what does fulfillment look like to me? And again, that's going to vary in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s, in your 50s, in your 60s. Your definition of fulfillment is going to change, and that's okay. So it's in this chapter, what does fulfillment look like to me? And what do I
Yep.
want it to be? And so I think that's the most important point is how do we find those answers within?
Oh, that's awesome advice. So maybe to wrap us up, tell a little bit about your podcast, What the Shift, and then the books that are out there and how we can access all of that information.
Of course. Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you, first of all, for having me on the show. It's
Of
an
course.
absolute honor to be here with you and your audience today. Yeah, so Power Shift is available where all books are sold. And What the Shift is available on all podcast platforms. My website is Gia Lacqua, GIALACQUA.com. I am active on Instagram and LinkedIn. Would love to connect with anyone who is interested in learning more or just having a chat. Feel free to connect with me.
Yeah, we will definitely put that in the show notes, all the information to contact Gia. So, to leave the audience with some pieces of advice that you would give either a younger generation, a woman that's maybe in college versus an experienced professional trying to evolve or potentially shift, the direction that she's going, what would be advice for both of those people if it's the same or is it different?
Yeah, so I think it's the same. I think it's important to recognize that your greatest strengths, and for the more accomplished women, your greatest professional asset can also be your biggest personal liability. And those can often be the same behavior. And most women never make that connection. So think about the things that you're most often praised for, whether you're 18 years
Mm.
old or you're 58 years old. What are the things that you're praised for, either through performance evaluations, through family and friends, at your wedding speech? What are the things that you're praised for? The things that people consistently name when they describe you. And then think about what each of these qualities is costing you privately that no one sees. And I think that's the shift is we want to hold on to the things that make us successful, but we also need to pull back when they're hurting us.
That's great advice, Gia. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I do think you're right. It applies to all women and men, truly, as we continue to evolve and shift. So, again, thank you to Gia Lacqua from the What the Shift podcast and her book series. And again, this is Christine Hummel on Root to Rising. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Until next time.